Hello everyone and welcome to game 3 of the second semi-final match between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. As you know, Magnus is in a pretty tough spot. He lost the first match and now he's losing the second match. So now we are in game 3 and Magnus needs to win both game 3 and game 4 to even get back into the match to try and force tie breaks. So without further ado, let's check it out, as this is a crazy game. Jan with the white pieces opens with e4. We have c5 by Magnus going for the Sicilian defense. Knight to f3, we have e6 and now d4. Jan strikes in the center, we have captures, and now queen to b6, already trying to mix it up. We have knight to c3, this is the so-called the queenist variation. We have a6, taking away the b5 square from the white knights, and now a3. And here Magnus goes back queen to c7. It's a very, very rare line, queen b6 back to c7. Only a handful of games in the database that reach this exact same position, and there is only bishop to d3 as a known move here. But here, Nepo plays g3, and it's already as of move 7 that we have a completely new game. So Magnus definitely ready to fight, and well, there's nothing left to do other than that. So here, preparing to think into the light square bishop, also setting up for bishop to f4 to go after the queen on c7. We have knight to f6 by Magnus, and now bishop to g2. We have knight to c6, and Nepo castles. We have h5, Magnus immediately going for this flank attack with h5, h4. And now knight captures on c6, b captures, and bishop to f4, slowing down the attack a little bit. Magnus advances the pawn with e5. This does take care of this problem, but it weakens the d5 square. When the pawn was on e6, you had some support for d5. Now, not so much. So, a double-edged move. So here, bishop to g5. And bishop to c5 by Magnus. So nicely developing. We have queen to f3 by Nepo, now preparing to capture on f6 twice, and Magnus just goes d6. It's actually a bit of a trick here, because if Nepo goes for it, then Magnus has this bishop to g4, chasing the queen and only then recapturing, and this is now a very much playable position for black. So instead, after after this d6 move, we have h3 in expectance of black, of course, pushing the h-pawn at some point, and now knight to d7. So getting the knight out of harm's way, and now you will be able to advance your f-pawn as well. And here we have rook 8 to d1 by Jan. We have knight to f8, the knight is now coming to e6. We have knight to a4, putting pressure on the bishop here, and knight to e6 now, going after the bishop on g5, bishop back to e3, and here Magnus trades. We have captures with the queen, and now finally h4, trying to bust open Nepo's king side, and Jan just goes knight to b6. It's not going after any pieces, he just wants to get the knight to c4 and then go after the backwards d6 pawn. As we said, it became weak as soon as e5 was played. So rook to b8, and now knight to c4. Very nicely done. You cannot play d5, it's defended 3 times by the pawn, bishop, and rook, so there's no that. So Magnus just decides to sacrifice a pawn, and he castles king side. He needs to win this, and he must play anything to win. And here, Nepo just goes knight captures on d6, it's a free pawn, so why not? We have h captures on g3, f captures on g3, and now rook captures on b2. So grabbing that pawn, we have queen to c3, attacking the rook, and now queen to b8. Magnus defends it. We have knight to f5. Again, Nepo with his knight close to Carlsen's king, but now rook to b5, getting the rook out of harm's way. So now the queen can move and the rook will not be under attack. Knight to e7 check, we have king to h7, and here you might be noticing that the g8 and g6 squares are covered, and if you play something like queen f3, queen h5, this will be checkmate. The problem here, you can't go for it right away, because Magnus has this very tricky queen a7 check, and that picks up the knight on e7. So Nepo needs to waste a move here before playing that. So king to h2, now this will very much be an idea, but now queen to c7, attacking the knight here. So Nepo must bring it back. We have knight to f5, and now rook to c5, putting pressure on the queen and also on the c2 pawn behind the queen. So queen d2, defending both of them. And now comes rook to d8, forcing the queen to move. We have queen back to f2, and now rook to c3. So what do you play here? As the a3 pawn is under attack, Nepo pushes it. We have a4, and now knight to d4. A very nice outpost for Carlsen's knight. Nepo trades here. We have knight captures, rook captures, knight captures, rook captures, and now queen to e2. So again, queen is trying to get to h5, maybe go for that f7 pawn if the black queen moves at some point. So here, bishop to e6, adding a defender to the f7 pawn, and then now just rook captures on d4. So grabbing that rook, e captures, and queen to h5 check. Magnus hides the king, king to g8, and now it's a very, very difficult position to play, especially with so little time on the clock. Magnus was even down below a minute. He had some 30 seconds on the clock. Nepo had some 2.5 minutes, but there really is no good move here. The position is just, well, very bad for white. It doesn't seem like it, but it is. Nepo played the rook to f4 here, and now there is one move that really tops all the moves. So feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on doing absolutely nothing. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's actually c5. And c5 basically does nothing other than advances this pawn. You're preparing c4. This pawn is coming over here. At some point, you might gain access to this diagonal. But point being, white does not have a move because you should not move your main attackers. The rook should remain here. The queen should remain here. And just don't move any of that, and you're going to be fine, because now you don't have rook here threatening checkmate because of queen captures on g3 check, and that's it. You're losing the game. Not much to be done here. King h1, king f8, white's attack is over. You're just going to hide the king here, and you're getting crushed. There's nothing for white to do here. So instead, after c5, you don't really have a good move here. You're going to have to play any move, but there really is no good move here, something like moving the queen, but then black slowly just improves the position. If you move the queen, something like queen e5, c4, d3, create a pass pawn, and so on, there really is no good move here for white. So c5 really crushing, but it's easy to miss with half a minute on the clock. So queen to e7 was played by Magnus. But now the immediate rook to h4, just going after that checkmate. So f6, defending against that, and now comes e5. Here, if you go queen to h8, it's really nothing. You just hide the king here, and there really is no good continuation here. You might just repeat like this. So instead, after f6, Nepo decided to go e5. He clears this diagonal for the bishop, which might be useful, but it's always difficult to get the bishop into the game, as rook captures on c2 would come with check. So it's basically just trading a pawn. F captures, queen captures, and now rook captures on c2 by Magnus. We have rook to e4. Now putting pressure on the bishop here, and here d3. Magnus says, you're welcome to grab my piece because I have a beautiful pass to d pawn. So Nepo trades, there really isn't anything better. We have captures, captures, and captures, and Magnus goes d2 now, threatening to bring a queen into the game. So Nepo must put a rook behind the pass pawn, and now Magnus advances the other pass pawn. So c5. We have g4. Nepo now needs to bring the king into the game, and c4 by Magnus. We have king to g3, and now c3 by Magnus. And here Nepo makes a move that doesn't really do him any favors. He plays king to h4, which is the wrong way to go with your king. You have to play the king closer to this position, but first you have to play something like bishop d5 check, and then you have to shift the bishop over here to help out with the defense of the light squares. Once the rook moves, now you start with king f2, and now the d1 square is defended twice, and if black prepares this with c2, then you have to give up the piece. But you're up a piece, so it doesn't matter. King e2, and you're defending the d1 square. So this was the way to defend for Jan, but he went king to h4, and now it doesn't work. Here Magnus just started bringing the king into the game. We have bishop to f3, kind of guarding the d1 square, yes, but rook to c1. So c2, you're not really defending against c2. So rook to d3 by Jan, and now king to e7. We have king to g5, and then now comes rook to f1. And again, what do you play here? If you capture on c3 now, then just rook captures on f3, eliminating that bishop, and after rook captures, you just bring a queen into the game, and that's it. It's game over. So after this rook to f1 move, we have rook to e3 with check, king to d6, and now rook to d3 with check. Magnus just brings the king even closer, and now there's really not all that much to do here. Jan grabbed it on c3, and now everything is clear. Rook captures on c3, rook captures, and now d1 queen, and here you really don't have a chance. Rook to f5 check was played, king to e4, and now a5. So the rook is now guarding everything. You're hoping to create some sort of a fortress, but the position simply does not allow it. Queen to d6 was played, king to h4, and now after g6, it was in this position that Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned the game, and it took 2 days and 7 games for Magnus to grab 1 point from Jan. So Jan was this close to already eliminating Magnus from the tournament and getting that one spot into the finals, but Magnus was able to bounce back, and now the score is still in Jan's favor. But if Magnus wins the final game, then Magnus will force tie breaks, and then anything can happen. So we'll see what happens in game 4. Will Jan be able to at least hold on to a draw, or will Magnus take the win? We'll see. So here you resign because you have to move the rook, and you can't keep an eye on everything. If you go rook to f7, then just queen to d8 with check. King g3, you're going to capture on a5. You've eliminated this pawn. Now you're going to start pushing this pawn to victory, and the rook is unable to help out at all. So, g6, Nepo resigns, and Magnus grabs his first win against Nepo. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Congratulations to everyone who found that to do absolutely nothing move. It wasn't an easy one to find. I would like to thank Mr. Hoodie Guy, Connor Watts, David Kimura, Nicholas Tvirkos, and Peter Smith for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.